Beneath our feet, far below ruined temples, silent deserts, and forgotten cities, there are chambers that ancient people never meant for ordinary eyes. Some were carved for gods, some were sealed for the dead, others were swallowed by earthquakes, floods, ash, and time itself. In the dark, archaeologists find smoke marks, broken offerings, painted walls, and doorways closed by human hands thousands of years ago. Before we go deeper into these lost temples beneath the earth, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you enjoy ancient mysteries, forgotten civilizations, and history that still refuses to sleep. The air beneath the hill is older than memory. It waits in the dark, heavy with limestone dust, cold enough to touch the skin like water, and still enough that a single breath seems to disturb something that has been sleeping for thousands of years. A narrow passage descends through the earth, not straight, not generous, but deliberately shaped, as if whoever carved it wanted the body to understand the journey before the mind did. The ceiling drops low, the walls close in. Daylight fades behind the last bend. Then, in the weak glow of a lamp, the chamber appears stone surfaces blackened by ancient smoke, shallow niches cut into the walls, fragments of pottery pressed into the dirt floor, and beyond them a doorway that was sealed, not by accident, but by human hands. There is no golden idol waiting in the centre, no perfect statue, no dramatic treasure arranged for discovery. The mystery is quieter than that, and in some ways more unsettling. What survives is a pattern, a room placed where sunlight cannot reach, a passage that forces descent, objects broken and left behind, stones used to close an entrance, and traces of fire where people once stood in the dark. It is the kind of place archaeology finds again and again in different landscapes, under different names, across centuries that never knew each other, beneath deserts, beneath cities, beneath ruined temples already forgotten by later generations. The sacred world sometimes turns downward. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. Because the story of lost temples beneath the earth is not only a story of buried buildings, it is a story of why human beings, from the earliest cave painters to the builders of great kingdoms, kept returning to darkness when they wanted to speak to powers larger than themselves. At first, the idea seems almost contradictory. Temples, in the imagination, rise upward. They stand on platforms, climb toward the sky, catch the morning sun on painted columns, or dominate a city from a sacred hill. Kings build them to be seen. Pilgrims approach them from roads lined with walls and statues. Their scale announces authority. Yet below that visible sacred world, another one persists. It is smaller, older, and often harder to explain. It hides in caves where handprints remain on stone. It lies under pyramids and in rock-cut chambers where the dead are prepared for rebirth. It follows tunnels to wells, springs, tombs, oracle caves, underground cities, and sealed rooms whose purpose is still debated. The temple above may belong to the living community, but the temple below belongs to a stranger borderland, where earth, death, water, silence, and memory meet. Scholars still debate how much of this underground sacred world should be called a temple in the strict sense. Some places are clearly sanctuaries, others are tombs, ritual chambers, initiation spaces, storage rooms, shelters, or caves later turned holy by tradition. The evidence remains incomplete because darkness preserves some things and erases others. Wood rots, cloth disappears, spoken prayers vanish instantly. Even stone, which seems permanent, can lose its meaning when no inscription survives to explain it. But what survives in the record suggests something powerful, and repeated ancient people did not treat the underground as empty space. They treated it as a threshold. That threshold could be frightening. It could also be protective. A cave mouth is an opening in the body of the land. A shaft cut into bedrock is a controlled wound in the surface of the world. A chamber buried under a temple is not merely hidden, it is set apart from ordinary time. To enter it is to leave behind the sky, the seasons, the movement of people, the noise of markets, the dust of roads. The descent changes everything. Sound behaves differently underground. A whisper expands. Footsteps return from unseen walls. Firelight moves over stone in ways daylight never does, making carved surfaces appear to breathe. In deep caves, even the simplest mark can feel alive when a lamp passes over it. This was not lost on ancient minds. Long before written theology, the underground already offered a theatre of transformation. The oldest traces are not temples in the later architectural sense, yet they form the beginning of the story. In prehistoric caves, people walked far beyond the areas useful for shelter. They carried pigments, lamps, tools, and sometimes children into passages where no one would sleep by accident. They painted animals on walls, pressed hands against stone, marked signs whose meanings are still uncertain, and left footprints in soft clay that hardened into time capsules. Some caves show repeated visits across generations. Others seem to have been entered briefly, intensely, and then abandoned. No single explanation fully accounts for this. Hunting magic, storytelling, initiation, memory, trance, identity, and contact with unseen forces have all been proposed, and each may explain part of the picture. But the setting itself matters. These acts happen inside the earth, in places where the world feels turned inward. Thousands of years later, when farming villages grow into towns and towns into cities, the underground does not lose its sacred force, it changes shape. The cave becomes the tomb becomes the hidden chamber, the spring becomes the oracle, the buried room becomes the place where a god descends, a king is reborn, or a dangerous power is contained. In Egypt, the journey through darkness becomes inseparable from the hope of renewal. In Mesopotamia, the underworld is not a comforting paradise, but a shadowed domain that must be acknowledged. In Anatolia, carved spaces beneath settlements blur the line between refuge, storage, and ritual memory. Around the Mediterranean, caves and chasms become entrances to divine voices, ancestral powers, and the cold imagination of the dead. Many of these places were never meant to be permanently open. That is one of their strangest features. Archaeologists find sealed passages, blocked doorways, filled shafts, and offerings placed where no ordinary visitor could admire them. A beautiful object buried in darkness is not performing for human eyes in the usual way. Its audience may have been a god, an ancestor, the dead, or the earth itself. Sometimes the ceiling marks an ending, a sanctuary closed after disaster. A tomb protected against intrusion, a ritual space deliberately retired. Sometimes it may mark a beginning, the moment when a deposit is placed below a new building to anchor it in sacred ground. The difficulty is that the same act can look similar in the soil whether it means fear, reverence, memory, or control. And then there are the temples lost not by intention, but by the slow violence of the world. Earthquakes crack walls and drop ceilings into chambers. Floods fill holy rooms with silt. Volcanoes bury shrines beneath ash so completely that later generations walk above them unaware. Cities move, languages change, rituals fade, and a sacred place becomes a hollow under a field. What was once approached with procession and song becomes a patch of uneven ground, a rumour of old stones, a local cave avoided after dark. Centuries pass. Roots enter the masonry. Bats colonize the roof. The temple is no longer hidden by priests, but by time. Modern discovery often begins with something unimpressive, a farmer's tool striking stone, a sinkhole opening after rain, a child noticing a draft from a crack, a worker clearing rubble, a survey instrument detecting an empty space where solid ground was expected. The first glimpse rarely explains much. Archaeology moves slowly because the underground is fragile. Every layer removed is a page that cannot be put back exactly as it was. A broken lamp, a smudge of soot, a bead, a seed. A burned bone, a pattern of wear on a threshold. Each may matter. The underground temple is not a treasure chest. It is a damage sentence, and the task is to read it without inventing too many missing words. That caution is necessary because buried sacred places attract fantasies. Popular stories often imagine vast secret civilizations, hidden libraries of impossible knowledge, or ancient machines concealed below temples. Such ideas are dramatic, but they are usually unsupported. The real record is more subtle and more human. It shows people working with stone, darkness, water, death, and memory. It shows fear and hope placed into architecture. It shows communities returning to the earth not because they lacked imagination, but because the earth itself was one of their oldest symbols. Beneath the surface, they found a place where the past seemed physically present, where the dead could remain near, where gods could be approached carefully, and where meaning could be hidden from ordinary light. So the descent begins not with a single lost temple, but with an idea that refuses to stay in one civilization. Across deep time, the sacred is not always built upward. Sometimes it is carved downward, sealed away, swallowed by disaster, or preserved in silence until a lamp enters again. The chamber waits. The smoke marks remain. The stones at the doorway hold their last arrangement, and in that darkness, the ancient world is not gone. It is only buried. To understand why sacred places so often sink below the surface, it helps to begin with the simple fact that ancient people knew with their bodies long before they explained it with myths. The earth is not silent. It opens, exhales, trembles, floods, shelters, feeds, and receives the dead. A hillside can split into a cave. A spring can rise from a crack in stone with no visible source. Steam can drift from a fissure. Bones can appear from a riverbank after rain. Seeds disappear into soil and return as grain. A body is placed in the ground and becomes part of the land. For people living close to weather, hunger, burial, and harvest, the world beneath their feet was not an empty lower level. It was active, hidden, dangerous, and strangely generous. This is one reason the underground becomes sacred again and again. It is the place where things vanish and change. Grain goes down as seed and returns as food. Water disappears into stone and emerges as a spring. The dead are lowered into darkness. Yet their names, objects, and obligations remain among the living. Fire comes from wood. Metal comes from ore. Salt comes from deposits. Pigments come from mineral earth. And sometimes strange bones of animals long extinct are found in caves or cliffs, inviting explanations that no ancient community could test scientifically. The underground is a storehouse, a womb, a grave, and a hidden workshop of transformation. That mixture gives it enormous symbolic force. A temple above ground can display order. It can show the power of a ruler, the wealth of a city, the skill of masons, and the proper relationship between humans and gods. A sacred chamber below ground does something different. It removes the visitor from the ordinary world. It narrows the senses. It makes distance feel uncertain. It turns a small flame into a moving sun. The body slows down, the voice drops, and even the confident person becomes careful. Ancient ritual often depends on this kind of controlled change. A place that alters the body can alter the mind. The descent itself becomes part of the meaning. Not every underground sanctuary begins with a planned religious design. Many begin as natural caves, rock shelters, springs, mines, tombs, or storage chambers. Later, people attach stories to them, shape them, carve them, block them, reopen them, or build temples above them. The evidence remains incomplete, because a cave used for shelter, ritual, burial, and refuge may leave traces that overlap. A hearth can be practical or ceremonial. Broken pottery can mean ordinary use, deliberate offering, or later disturbance. A carved niche can hold a lamp, a statue, a jar, or nothing at all by the time archaeologists arrive. Yet across many regions, the pattern is strong enough to matter. When people wanted to approach the hidden powers of the world, they often chose places where the world was already hidden from them. Water is one of the clearest reasons. Springs, wells, cisterns, and underground pools appear in sacred traditions across the ancient world because water rising from darkness feels different from water falling as rain. It seems to come from a secret source, in dry landscapes especially. The appearance of water from stone can become an event charged with meaning. A spring might be linked with healing, prophecy, fertility, or the presence of a deity. Even where later myths give names and personalities to these powers, the original force is partly environmental. People gather where water saves life. Repetition turns gathering into custom. Custom turns into ritual. Ritual leaves offerings. Eventually, the place becomes sacred enough that architecture grows around it, above it, or below it. Death is another reason, perhaps the deepest one. Tombs and temples are not identical, but in many ancient cultures they exist near each other in thought. The dead require care, ancestors require memory. Kings and elites often use burial architecture to claim divine or semi-divine status. Communities use graves to hold land, lineage, and identity together. Once the dead are placed underground, the earth becomes more than terrain. It becomes an archive of human presence. A chamber beneath a monument is not only a storage space for a corpse or offerings, it is a place where the living negotiate with absence. What survives in the record suggests that many ancient societies believed the boundary between living and dead was not a wall, but a threshold that had to be managed. This does not mean all underground ritual was grim. Some of it may have been hopeful, seasonal, or protective. Agricultural societies watched the buried seed return, and that pattern made descent and rebirth inseparable in many religious imaginations. The god who goes below and returns, the king who passes through darkness and rises renewed, the initiate who enters a chamber and emerges changed, all belong to a broad human grammar of transformation. Scholars still debate how directly such ideas can be connected across cultures, and caution is necessary. Similar symbols can arise independently because human beings everywhere bury seeds, bury the dead, seek water, fear darkness, and notice caves. No single explanation fully accounts for this. Still, the repeated association between underground spaces and renewal is too widespread to dismiss. There is also the matter of secrecy. Sacred knowledge is often powerful because it is restricted. Not everyone may see the innermost object, enter the deepest chamber, hear the hidden name, or take part in the most dangerous ritual. Underground architecture naturally serves this separation. A passage can control movement, a low doorway can force humility, a sealed chamber can protect objects from ordinary view. A descending route can divide the initiated from the uninitiated without needing a written rule. Even when the space is not physically deep, the feeling of being enclosed below stone can create a sense of privilege and danger. To be admitted is to cross a boundary. Protection matters too. Temples above ground are visible, but visibility can invite destruction. In times of war, invasion, persecution, political upheaval, or environmental stress, sacred objects may be hidden in pits, caves, crypts, wells, and buried rooms. Sometimes the underground temple is not originally meant as a grand religious theatre, but as a refuge for what must survive. In other cases, communities live or gather underground for practical reasons and carry ritual life with them. The line between shelter and sanctuary can blur. A chamber used to protect grain, people, or images in one generation may become holy in memory for the next. The physical qualities of stone also shape belief. Underground spaces preserve temperature. They muffle the outside world. They can hold smoke, scent, and sound. Many caves have acoustics that make voices seem larger or stranger than their source. In some chambers, a drumbeat or chant would have returned from the walls with unusual force. Firelight on uneven stone can animate painted animals, carved figures, or natural formations that resemble bodies, faces, or flowing cloth. Ancient people did not need to be superstitious in a simple-minded way to feel the power of such effects. They were attentive to atmosphere, perhaps more than modern people usually are. A cave could teach the senses that another kind of presence was near. This is why the lost temples beneath the earth cannot be understood only as hidden architecture. They belong to a much older relationship between people and landscape. The underground offered ancient communities a language before writing, a theatre before drama, a memory system before archives, and a boundary before theology. It gave shape to fear, grief, rebirth, secrecy, and protection. It could hold the dead, preserve the sacred, and make the invisible feel close. And once human beings discovered that darkness could be shaped into meaning, they never entirely stopped descending. Long before temples had columns, courtyards, roofs, gates, or names carved into stone, the sacred world was already waiting in caves. It waited beyond the reach of weather, beyond the small fires of camp, beyond the useful front rooms where people could shelter from rain or wind. The deepest parts of many painted caves were not comfortable places to live. They were cold, narrow, awkward, and sometimes dangerous. To reach them, people had to crawl, squeeze through passages, carry light carefully, and trust that they could find the way back. That effort matters. It suggests that these journeys were not accidental wanderings into darkness. They were chosen. In the glow of a flickering lamp, the walls of a prehistoric cave are not still. They ripple. Limestone bulges become shoulders, cracks become outlines. A ledge becomes the back of an animal, a hollow becomes an eye. In places like Chauvet, Lascaux, Altamira, and many other caves across Europe and beyond, ancient artists did not simply cover flat surfaces with images. They often worked with the natural shape of the rock, using its curves and shadows to give animals a strange living force. Horses, bison, lions, rhinoceroses, mammoths, deer, and other creatures seem to emerge from the stone rather than sit upon it. The cave wall becomes less like a canvas and more like a membrane between worlds. What these images meant is still debated. Earlier generations of scholars often explained them as hunting magic, as if painting an animal might help hunters control it in life. That idea may explain some things, but it cannot explain everything. Some animals painted in caves were not the most commonly eaten animals. Some dangerous creatures appear with intense care, even when they were not obvious prey. Some caves contain abstract signs, hand stencils, dots, lines, and markings that resist simple interpretation. The evidence remains incomplete because the people who made these images left no written explanation. Their world has to be approached through stone, pigment, bone, charcoal, and the movement of bodies through darkness. Even so, the pattern is powerful. People returned again and again to hidden chambers to make marks that clearly mattered. Red ochre, black charcoal, manganese, and other pigments were carried inside. Lamps made from stone or bone-burned animal fat. Torches left smoke marks on ceilings. Scaffolding or climbing may have been needed in some areas to reach high surfaces. These were not casual gestures. They required planning, skill, and memory. Some paintings show confident lines made by people who understood the animals intimately, not as decorative symbols but as beings with weight, motion, muscle, and breath. A bison turns with heavy force. A horse's neck bends in a moment of tension. A lion's body stretches forward in silence. The art is ancient, but the observation is sharp enough to feel immediate. There is a lesser-known detail that gives these caves an even more human presence. In several prehistoric caves, archaeologists have found footprints preserved in soft clay, sometimes belonging to adults, sometimes to adolescents, and sometimes to children. These prints do not speak in words, but they bring the scene closer than any grand theory. A person walked there with bare feet or simple covering. Someone carried a lamp. Someone paused, turned, stepped around a puddle, or followed another person deeper into the passage. In some places, the footprints suggest movement that may have been careful and ritualized. In others, The interpretation remains uncertain, but they remind us that sacred darkness was not an abstract idea. It was entered by real bodies. The sounds of these caves may have mattered as much as the images. Modern researchers have noticed that some painted areas occur where echoes are unusually strong, although the relationship is not universal, and scholars still debate how much weight to give it. Still, it is easy to understand why sound would shape experience underground. A voice in a deep cave does not behave like a voice under open sky. It returns altered. A chant can thicken. A clap can seem to answer from stone. In total darkness, the ear becomes more alert, and sound can make a chamber feel inhabited. For people without electric light, without modern maps, and without the habit of treating caves as tourist sites, such effects could have been profound. The handprints are among the most haunting traces. Some are made by pressing a pigment-covered hand against the wall. Others are stencils, formed when pigment was blown around the hand, leaving a pale shape surrounded by colour. They are simple, almost universal gestures, yet they carry a strange intimacy. A hand on stone says, without language, that someone was there. It also may say much more. It may mark identity, participation, presence, transformation, or belonging. Some studies suggest that many hands were not necessarily male, challenging older assumptions that prehistoric ritual and art were mainly the work of men. The evidence is not always certain, and methods of estimating sex from hand proportions have limits, but the possibility matters. The cave was likely not the spiritual world of one narrow group. It may have held many roles, many ages, and many forms of participation. In these earliest sacred caves, darkness itself becomes a partner in meaning. The paintings were not always meant to be seen all at once. Many could only be viewed by moving through the cave with firelight. A figure might appear suddenly at the edge of a flame, then vanish as the lamp shifted. Some animals overlap, creating dense scenes where forms emerge slowly. Some marks are placed in tight spaces where viewing them requires awkward posture. This suggests an experience very different from looking at art on a museum wall. The cave image was not separated from the journey. It belonged to the cold air, the smoke, the echo, the smell of burning fat, the uneven floor, and the knowledge that stone surrounded the visitor on every side. No single explanation fully accounts for why these places were made. They may have been connected to hunting, teaching, initiation, storytelling, social memory, trance, identity, or relationships with animal powers. Different caves may have served different purposes, and the same cave may have changed meaning across generations. What survives in the record suggests that prehistoric people were not simply decorating hidden walls. They were creating places where the visible and invisible could meet. The cave offered a world removed from ordinary life, and inside that world, images of animals, hands, signs, and footprints formed a kind of sacred geography. These were not temples built by architects, but they carried the first deep logic of underground sanctuaries. They required descent, they transformed the senses, they restricted access, they preserved marks meant to outlast a single moment, they turned stone into memory. Later civilizations would build pyramids, tombs, crypts, oracle caves, and hidden chambers with more formal plans and richer materials. But the older impulse was already present in the painted dark to enter the earth, to make meaning where daylight fails, and to leave behind a trace that the world above could forget, but the world below might keep. The deeper a cave goes, the less likely it is that people entered it for ordinary reasons. Near the mouth, the explanations are easier. There is shelter from rain, shade from heat, a place to butcher animals, repair tools, sleep beside a fire, or watch the landscape from a protected edge. But far inside, where the air turns cold and the floor becomes uneven, where light must be carried and every step depends on memory, usefulness fades. The cave no longer behaves like a house. It behaves like a test. And in many Stone Age sites, the traces left in those difficult spaces suggest that people were doing something more deliberate than passing time underground. The evidence is rarely spectacular in the way people expect. It is not a row of altars or a written prayer left conveniently on the wall. It is quieter and stranger pigment ground on stone, lamps placed in niches, animal bones arranged in unusual positions, footprints preserved in soft clay, hand marks in remote chambers, broken stalagmites, charcoal stains on ceilings, and objects deposited where no one would naturally lose them. Each clue is small, together. They create the impression of repeated action, and repeated action is one of the foundations of ritual. A single dropped tool may be an accident. A pattern across chambers, across generations, and across distant regions becomes harder to dismiss. In some caves, people carried red ochre deep into the earth. Red pigment appears across prehistoric contexts all over the world, used on bodies, objects, burials, and stone surfaces. Its meaning was not fixed everywhere, and scholars still debate how far any interpretation can go. It may have suggested blood, life, transformation, beauty, protection, identity, or something else entirely. What matters here is that it was often selected, prepared, transported, and applied with care. A lump of ochre in a remote cave chamber is not just a coloured rock. It is evidence of intention. Someone valued that colour enough to bring it into darkness. Fire was even more essential. Without fire, the deep cave is not mysterious. It is simply inaccessible. Stone lamps, torches, hearth traces, and smoke stains reveal how prehistoric people managed darkness. They understood fuel, airflow, flame, and movement. A lamp had to burn long enough for the journey in and out. A torch gave brighter light, but also smoke, sparks, and risk. Fire did more than make the walls visible. It changed them. Flame makes painted animals shift. Shadows enlarge the human body. Smoke gathers above like a dark ceiling beneath the real one. The smell of burning fat or resin would have filled enclosed spaces, making the experience physical and memorable. Ancient ritual did not need complicated machinery. A small flame in a deep cave was already powerful enough. Some of the most compelling traces are footprints, because they preserve movement rather than objects. In certain caves, tracks cross clay floors that hardened after being left undisturbed. They show that people walked, paused, turned, slipped, or followed one another. Sometimes the prints belong to individuals of different ages. This detail is easy to overlook, but it matters because it complicates the older image of prehistoric ritual as an activity of adult male hunters alone. The underground may have included young people, possibly as participants, learners, witnesses, or initiates. The evidence remains incomplete, and footprints cannot tell us what people believed, but they can tell us that the journey involved bodies moving through a difficult sacred space, not merely artists working alone. At times, the traces feel almost choreographed. In some caves, marks appear in places that require crawling or reaching. In others, footprints lead toward decorated chambers and then away again. Certain passages seem to have been visited repeatedly while nearby spaces were ignored. The route itself may have mattered. A person entering such a cave would pass from daylight into twilight, from twilight into darkness, from open walking into crouching or crawling, from ordinary sound into echo. The body would feel the descent before the mind gave it meaning. This is why some archaeologists think deep cave rituals may have included initiation, storytelling, or altered states of consciousness. These ideas are plausible, but they remain difficult to prove. No single explanation fully accounts for the evidence. Animal bones add another layer of uncertainty. Many caves naturally collect bones. Carnivores drag prey into them. Animals fall into shafts. Floods move remains from one chamber to another. Later disturbance can mix layers in confusing ways. Because of this, archaeologists must be cautious before calling any bone deposit ritual. Yet some finds are unusual enough to invite serious discussion. Skulls placed apart from bodies, bones associated with pigments, remains found in decorated zones, or animal parts arranged in ways that do not look like ordinary butchery. These may represent offerings, symbolic acts, hunting memories, or something else that no longer survives in language. What survives in the record suggests attention, but attention is not always easy to translate. There are also marks that are not animals and not hands. Dots, lines, grids, branching forms, and repeated signs appear in many painted caves. Some may be counting marks, some may identify groups, seasons, animals, stories, or states of mind. Some may be marks made during ritual actions whose meaning was obvious to participants and opaque to everyone else. Modern viewers often want prehistoric signs to behave like writing, but they may not have worked that way. They might have been closer to memory aids, sacred symbols, or gestures of presence. The difficulty is that symbols can survive while their grammar disappears. One lesser-known feature of deep cave activity is how much practical knowledge it required. These were not people stumbling in fear through unknown holes in the ground. They mapped routes by experience. They knew where footing was safe, where ceilings lowered, where lamps could rest, where smoke gathered, and where the most resonant chambers lay. Some caves show evidence that people moved with impressive confidence through spaces that would challenge modern visitors, even with helmets and electric lights. This practical mastery is part of the sacred story. The underground was not only feared, it was learned. The more closely these caves are studied, the more they resist simple categories. They were not churches in the later sense, yet they were not merely art galleries. They were not homes, yet people returned to them. They were not tombs in every case, yet they often seem tied to death, animals, transformation, and hidden forces. Their power lies in that overlap. A deep cave could be a place of memory, danger, teaching, vision, and belonging all at once. It could hold the tracks of the living beside the bones of animals and the images of beings painted as if they had just stepped out of the stone. And when the last lamp went out, the cave kept everything it could. Smoke marks stayed on the ceiling, pigment dried on the wall, footprints hardened, broken objects settled into sediment. The people returned to daylight, perhaps changed, perhaps silent, perhaps carrying a story that would never be written. Behind them, in the dark, the first underground sanctuaries waited without needing names. When villages become cities, the sacred underground does not disappear, it becomes organized. The old darkness of caves is carried into new architecture, translated into brick, stone, mud, plaster, shaft, stairway, and sealed foundation. Above ground, early cities begin to announce themselves with walls, gates, streets, workshops, granaries, houses, palaces, and temples rising over crowded neighborhoods. But beneath those visible forms, another sacred map remains. The city looks upward toward towers and platforms, yet it also looks downward toward tombs, wells, cellars, drains, foundation deposits, buried offerings, and the imagined lands of the dead. Civilization does not replace the underworld. It gives the underworld a plan. In Mesopotamia, where cities rise between the Tigris and Euphrates, temples dominate the horizon. Their platforms lift divine houses above the floodplain, creating a visible link between human labor and divine authority. Yet the religious imagination of Mesopotamia is never only vertical in the upward sense. Beneath the city lies another realm, darker and more difficult, the land of the dead, a place of dust, shadow, and diminished existence. The living feed the gods in temples above, but they also remember the dead through offerings, burials, and household practices that keep ancestors close. In some homes, graves are placed beneath floors. The dead are not always far away in a distant cemetery. They may rest under the rooms where families continue to cook, sleep, argue, and repair their tools. The house itself becomes layered, with everyday life above and ancestry below. That intimacy can feel strange to modern people, but it makes sense in a world where land, family, inheritance, and memory are tightly bound together. To bury the dead beneath or near the home is not simply to hide them. It is to keep them inside the social body of the household. What survives in the record suggests that ancestors could remain important members of the living community, even after death. They required attention. Neglect could be dangerous. Proper care helped maintain order. The underground here is not a forgotten void. It is a place of relationship, obligation, and controlled nearness. The same logic appears in different forms across early civilizations, under thresholds, beneath floors, and inside foundations. Archaeologists find objects placed deliberately before buildings are completed. These foundation deposits may include pottery, animal bones, small figurines, tools, beads, food remains, or other offerings. Their exact meanings vary, and scholars still debate the details. But the broad intention is clear enough: the act of building is not only practical, it is ritual. A structure must be anchored not only in soil, but in meaning. Something is placed below so that what rises above can stand within a sacred order. The hidden object supports the visible world. This is one of the great transformations from prehistoric sacred caves to urban religion. The underground no longer needs to be a natural chamber waiting in a hillside. It can be made. A pit can become a ritual mouth in the ground. A shaft can connect a temple to hidden water. A tomb can be carved to imitate cosmic geography. A well can become a sacred axis between surface life and deep sources. Cities create artificial landscapes, and within them the old power of descent is rebuilt in human form. The sacred is no longer found only where nature opens the earth. It is engineered where society needs it. Wells are especially important in this shift. In early towns and cities, water is survival, but it is also mystery. A well is a vertical passage into darkness that gives life back to the surface. It is practical enough for daily use, and strange enough to attract reverence. People draw from it, gather around it, drop objects into it, tell stories about it, fear its contamination, and sometimes treat it as a place where offerings can pass from the human world into another domain. A temple may stand nearby, or a shrine may grow around a spring that existed long before the settlement. Over time, the boundary between utility and sanctity can become difficult to separate. No single explanation fully accounts for every deposit found in ancient wells, because objects enter them by accident, disposal, disaster, and ritual. But many wells and springs clearly held meanings deeper than convenience. In Egypt, the relationship between the built world and the hidden world develops with extraordinary intensity, though its full sacred architecture will draw us deeper soon enough. Even at the broadest level, Egyptian religion shows how tomb, temple, and landscape can merge. The desert edge, the river valley, the rising sun, the setting sun, the buried body, and the preserved name all become parts of a single cosmic drama. Stone chambers below monuments are not merely containers. They are places where the dead pass into a transformed state. The visible structure above matters, but the hidden chamber below holds the most delicate work of eternity. The earth receives the body, but the architecture teaches that descent is not only an ending. Anatolia offers another kind of complexity. Across its landscapes, people carve into soft volcanic rock, bury earlier ritual spaces, build over older sacred sites, and sometimes use underground rooms for both practical and spiritual purposes. Later, underground cities and rock-cut chambers can blur the line between refuge and sacred space. But the impulse has deep roots. Settlements are not simply placed on the land. They grow through layers. One generation builds above another. Shrines are abandoned, filled, remembered, replaced, or reinterpreted. The result is a vertical history, where the sacred past is literally beneath the feet of the living. A city does not only expand outward, it thickens downward. This layering is one of the most important facts about ancient sacred places. Temples are often rebuilt on older temples. Shrines rise over earlier shrines. Tombs remain respected even when their names are forgotten. A holy spring may continue to matter through several cultures, each giving it a new story. By the time archaeologists arrive, the ground may contain centuries of belief stacked like sediment. The lowest layer may not be the simplest. The newest structure may not erase the oldest meaning. Instead, the sacred place becomes a palimpsest, written over again and again, with traces of earlier worlds still showing through. Underworld myths give these architectural patterns emotional force. The world below is imagined differently in each culture, but it is rarely meaningless. It may be a gloomy land of dust, a dangerous route of judgment, a womb of renewal, a realm of ancestors, a place of imprisoned powers, or a hidden source of fertility. These ideas do not float separately from architecture. They shape how people bury, build, seal, descend, and remember. A stairway can become more than access. A chamber can become more than storage. A threshold can become a border between states of being. And so, as cities rise into the open air, their deepest mysteries settle below. The sacred is now public and hidden at the same time. Crowds may gather in courtyards, priests may serve in temples, rulers may boast through monuments, and festivals may fill streets with music and dust. Yet beneath all of that movement, offerings lie where no one sees them, ancestors rest under floors, water rises through dark shafts, and the imagined dead keep their silent kingdoms. The city above is alive with noise, but the gods below are never entirely absent. In Egypt, the sacred underground becomes almost an art of controlled darkness. The land itself encourages this imagination. On one side lies the Nile, bright, fertile, seasonal, and crowded with human labour. On the other side, only a short walk away in many places, the desert rises in pale cliffs and silent plateaus, where the dead can remain above the flood, yet beneath the authority of stone. Life gathers along the river. Eternity withdraws into the dry earth. Between these two worlds, Egyptian builders create some of the most enduring religious architecture ever made, and much of its deepest meaning is not found in what rises toward the sun, but in what is hidden below. The pyramid is the clearest example, because its visible shape is so commanding that it almost distracts from the buried drama inside. From outside, a pyramid appears to be a mountain of order, geometric, bright, impossible to ignore. But the journey of the king is not performed on the outer face. It happens through passages, shafts, chambers, blocking stones, and sealed spaces designed to protect a transformation no living crowd could witness. The body lies in darkness, surrounded by architecture that speaks of permanence, ascent, and rebirth. The structure reaches upward, yet its secret heart is enclosed within stone. That contradiction is essential. Egyptian sacred architecture often works by joining opposites sun and burial, river and desert, decay and preservation, silence and divine speech. The tombs of Egypt are not temples in the ordinary public sense, but they are sacred structures shaped by ritual purpose. They are built or carved to serve the dead, especially those with status and resources, as they continue into another form of existence. The underground chamber protects the body, but protection is only part of the story. The dead must be supplied, named, remembered, transformed, and placed within cosmic order. Walls can carry images of offerings, journeys, fields, gods, boats, servants, food, animals, and idealized life. These scenes are not merely decoration. They help make an eternal world available to the deceased. What survives in the record suggests that Egyptian tomb art is both memory and mechanism, both image and sacred tool. Yet the most powerful spaces are often the least visible. A visitor to a ruined temple might see columns, courts, pylons, statues, and walls open to the sky. But Egyptian religion also depends on restricted rooms, crypts, hidden chapels, and symbolic depths. Temples are not only places where people gather, they are houses of gods, carefully arranged from public outer zones to increasingly sacred inner spaces. The deeper one moves into the temple, the more restricted the access becomes. Light narrows, ceilings lower in some designs, The innermost sanctuary may hold the divine image, visited only by priests and surrounded by ritual secrecy. Even when it is not literally underground, the movement inward imitates descent into hidden sacredness. Some temples include crypts and concealed chambers beneath floors or within walls, used for sacred objects, ritual equipment, or divine images. These spaces remind us that hiddenness itself has religious power. An object does not need to be displayed to be active. In Egyptian thinking, the concealed image, the protected name, and the sealed chamber can hold force precisely because they are not exposed to ordinary view. Scholars still debate the exact uses of some temple crypts, especially when texts are damaged or later activity has disturbed the archaeological record. But the pattern is clear: sacred power can be intensified by enclosure. The god Osiris draws this underground imagination into one of its most enduring forms. Osiris is linked with death, kingship, fertility, resurrection, and the green renewal of life after burial. His story makes the earth itself part of divine transformation. Grain placed in soil, the Nile's cycle of renewal, and the preserved body of the dead all echo one another. In some rituals, specially prepared forms associated with Osiris could be made with earth and grain, allowing sprouting life to symbolize divine rebirth. It is a detail both humble and profound, the mystery of resurrection, expressed not only through gold and stone, but through damp soil and germinating seeds. No single explanation fully accounts for every local Osirian practice across Egypt's long history, but the link between burial and renewal remains unmistakable. At Abydos, one of Egypt's most important sacred landscapes, memory, kingship, and underworld devotion gather with exceptional force. The area becomes associated with Osiris and with royal ancestors, and pilgrims come to participate in sacred memory even if they cannot be buried there. Cenotaphs, offering places, processional routes, and symbolic tombs create a landscape where the boundary between earthly geography and mythic geography becomes unusually thin. Beneath and around these monuments lies the idea that a place can be holy not simply because of a building, but because generations believe the dead and divine are especially near there. The evidence remains incomplete in many details, especially when later reuse and ancient disturbance complicate interpretation. Yet Abydos shows how sacred underground imagination can extend across an entire landscape. Rock-cut tombs in the Valley of the Kings reveal another expression of this hidden architecture. Here, royal burial moves away from the visible pyramid form into the cliffs and valleys of western Thebes. The tombs are carved into the mountain, their corridors and chambers descending into stone like carefully planned routes through the underworld. Their walls carry scenes from funerary texts, divine beings, solar journeys, gates, guardians, and the night voyage of the sun. The king does not merely lie in a chamber. He travels through a cosmic landscape painted around him. The tomb becomes a map of dangerous passage and hoped for renewal. Darkness is not an absence. It is the setting through which rebirth must move. One of the surprising features of these spaces is the technical precision required to create sacred concealment. Cutting corridors into rock, planning chambers, painting walls under limited light, moving heavy sarcophagi, sealing entrances, and hiding access routes all demanded skilled labour and organisation. The secrecy of a tomb was never absolute, as ancient robbery shows again and again, but the intention to protect and set apart remains visible. Blocking stones, hidden shafts, false routes, and sealed doors express both practical concern and ritual finality. The dead are placed beyond ordinary reach, yet the living continue to serve them through offerings, texts, and memory. Egypt's underground sacred architecture also reveals a tension between preservation and loss. The dry desert can protect bodies, textiles, wood, pigment, and papyrus better than many other environments, which is one reason Egypt feels so unusually present to the modern imagination. But survival is uneven. Robbers entered many tombs. Floods damaged others. Early excavations sometimes destroyed context. Temples were quarried. reused, buried, uncovered, and misunderstood. What appears eternal is often only what happened to survive a long chain of accidents. This makes the hidden chambers more valuable, but also more fragile. They preserve voices from the past without giving those voices back completely. Still, Egypt shows with extraordinary clarity why ancient people placed sacred meaning beneath the earth. The underground chamber holds the body against decay. The crypt guards divine objects. The tomb wall turns belief into painted geography. The seed in dark soil becomes an image of return. The desert cliff becomes a gate into the west, where the sun itself disappears each evening and rises again. For Egyptian religion, descent is not simply a fall into nothing. It is a passage through danger toward renewal, if the proper names are spoken, the proper rituals performed, and the fragile body protected from the violence of time. The deeper the Egyptian story goes, the more it reveals that lost temples beneath the earth are not always lost because they were forgotten. Some were hidden because hiddenness was their purpose. They were made for gods, kings, ancestors, and transformations that ordinary daylight could not contain. Above them, the Nile kept moving, fields turned green, cities changed rulers, and generations came and went. Below, in chambers of stone and painted night, Egypt continued its long conversation with death, rebirth, and the sacred power of the unseen. Across Anatolia, the earth has always seemed unusually willing to be carved. Volcanic landscapes soften into strange cones and ridges. Tough cliffs can be cut by hand tools. Valleys open into hidden rooms, storage pits, chapels, shelters, and tunnels. Wind and erosion shape the land first. Then people continue the work, turning natural softness into human refuge. Here, more than in many regions, the boundary between landscape and architecture becomes difficult to draw. A chamber may begin as geology and end as a room. A cave may become a shrine. A hidden passage may be made for survival, then remembered through fear, devotion, and legend. Anatolia is not a single ancient culture, and that is part of its mystery. It is a bridge of mountains, plateaus, river valleys, trade routes, and migrations, touched by Neolithic communities, Hittites, Phrygians, Greeks, Romans, Byzantines, and many others. Each layer leaves something behind. Settlements rise over earlier settlements. Sacred places are reused, renamed, buried, or absorbed into new religious worlds. The result is not one underground temple tradition, but a long habit of making meaning inside the earth. In some places, the reason is practical. In others, clearly ritual. Often it is both. The most famous underground landscapes of Anatolia are the great subterranean cities of Cappadocia, where entire networks of rooms, tunnels, ventilation shafts, storage areas, stables, kitchens, wells, and defensive passages extend beneath the surface. Later communities, especially in periods of insecurity, used these spaces as refuges. Heavy rolling stone doors could block passages. Narrow tunnels forced attackers to slow down. Air shafts allowed people to remain below longer than a simple hiding place would permit. These were not temples in the narrow sense, but they show how underground life can become a total human world. People brought food, animals, water, tools, and belief with them below. When a community hides underground, its sacred life does not stay behind in the daylight. The evidence for the earliest phases of some underground complexes remains difficult to untangle. Chambers were expanded, reused, repaired, and modified over centuries. A room cut for storage could later become a chapel. A passage made for defense might intersect with older cavities. A hidden space could be forgotten and then reopened by people with entirely different beliefs. Scholars still debate the chronology of some of these subterranean networks, and popular accounts often make them older, larger, or more mysterious than the evidence securely allows. Yet even without exaggeration, they are remarkable. They reveal a landscape where descent was not occasional. It was built into survival. Rock-cut churches and chapels in Cappadocia add another layer to this story. Many belong to the Christian centuries, with painted interiors, carved apses, simple altars, and sacred imagery placed inside stone. Their presence shows how easily the underground or semi-underground chamber can become a devotional space when the landscape invites carving. The walls are not assembled block by block, they are released from the earth. A chapel carved into rock feels different from one built under open sky. Its sacred enclosure is immediate. The mountain itself becomes the architecture. Even when these chapels are historically later than the ancient temples of Egypt or Mesopotamia, they preserve the older instinct to make holy space by entering stone. But Anatolia's buried ritual worlds go much deeper than Cappadocia's later refuges and churches. At Catalhoyuk, one of the great Neolithic settlements of central Anatolia, the sacred is not hidden beneath monumental temples in the later sense. It is woven into domestic life. Houses are entered from the roof. Floors are replastered again and again. Burials are placed beneath platforms inside homes. Wall paintings, installations, animal horns, and modelled features suggest that memory, ancestry. And ritual were not separated from everyday living. The dead rest below the floors while the living cook, sleep, work, and repair the house above them. Here the underground is not a distant underworld chamber. It is directly under the body at rest. This detail changes the way lost temples beneath the earth must be imagined. Not every sacred underground space is grand. Some are intimate, almost domestic. A family platform, a buried ancestor, a plastered skull, a wall image, or a deposit beneath a floor can carry sacred weight without looking like a temple at all. What survives in the record suggests that early communities did not always divide life into clean categories of house, shrine, tomb, and temple. The same building could hold cooking, sleeping, burial, memory, and ritual attention. The sacred beneath the earth was not always remote. Sometimes it was directly under the mat where someone slept. Further east and south, Anatolia's older sacred landscapes become even more enigmatic. Göbekli Tepe, though not an underground temple, is crucial because some of its monumental enclosures were deliberately buried after use. Tall T-shaped pillars, carved animals, stone rings, and carefully constructed spaces were eventually filled in with debris. This deliberate burial has fascinated scholars because it suggests not abandonment by simple neglect, but a more complex ending. The site was not swallowed by nature in a single accident. People appear to have closed parts of it intentionally. Why they did so remains debated. It may have marked ritual retirement, social change, rebuilding, memory, or practices we do not yet understand. No single explanation fully accounts for this. The burial of a sacred place is different from its destruction. To destroy is to erase violently. To bury can be to preserve, conceal, transform, or release. A filled enclosure may no longer serve the living in the same way, but it remains held inside the earth. In this sense, Anatolia offers one of the strangest reversals in the story of underground temples. Some sacred places did not begin below ground. They were made subterranean by human decision after their active life ended. The earth became a final covering, a ritual silence placed over stone. Hittite and later Anatolian traditions also carry strong connections between rock, spring, mountain, and divine presence. Rock reliefs, sacred pools, carved chambers, and open-air sanctuaries show that stone landscapes could act as meeting points between rulers, gods, ancestors, and cosmic order. Not all of these are underground, but many belong to the same religious imagination. The divine is encountered where the natural world appears unusually powerful at a cliff face, a spring, a cave, a mountain pass, a carved recess, a place where water and stone meet. In such settings, the sacred does not need to be invented from nothing. It is recognized, shaped, and framed. The underground in Anatolia therefore has many meanings. It can protect villagers from danger, it can preserve food and water, it can hold the dead beneath the living, it can turn volcanic stone into chapels. It can cover an ancient sanctuary at the end of its life. It can blur the boundary between refuge and ritual until the two are almost inseparable. That is why the region matters so much to the larger story. It shows that buried sacred places are not always planned as hidden temples from the beginning. Sometimes they become sacred because people survive there. Sometimes they become hidden because people choose to close them. Sometimes they are holy because generations continue to build over what came before. Anatolia's earth is full of such layered meanings. A tunnel may begin in fear, a chamber may become a prayer room, a buried floor may hold ancestors, a filled enclosure may preserve a vanished ritual order. Above ground, empires arrive and disappear, languages change, armies cross the plateau, and villages rebuild after fire, drought, or war. Below, carved rooms wait inside soft stone, holding the marks of people who understood that the earth could be shelter, memory, and sacred boundary all at once. Around the Mediterranean, the sacred underground becomes less a single place than a repeated movement downward, inward, toward voices, springs, caves, tombs, and powers older than the bright temples of the city. The Greeks and Romans are often remembered through marble columns, sunlit sanctuaries, open-air theatres, and statues standing against the sky. Yet beneath that clear surface lies a darker religious geography. Gods do not only live on mountains, they also dwell below fields, inside caverns, beside fissures, under thresholds, and among the dead. The Mediterranean imagination is crowded with beings who belong to the earth's hidden side, chthonic gods, ancestral spirits, prophetic powers, healing forces, and the restless dead who must be honoured carefully. A cave in this world is never only a cave. It can be a birthplace of gods, a dwelling of nymphs, an entrance to the underworld, a place of initiation, a refuge for sacred objects, or a chamber where human senses become vulnerable enough to receive messages. Some caves were linked with springs and flowing water, giving them an atmosphere of both life and danger. Others opened in cliffs, mountains, and coastal places where wind, echo, and shadow made the natural world feel alert. When later communities built shrines at cave mouths or placed offerings inside, they were not simply decorating geology, they were marking a boundary that already felt charged. Greek religion, for all its famous temples above ground, keeps returning to what lies below. The dead are not normally imagined as gone into nothing. They remain in a shadowed order that touches the living through burial, memory, and ritual obligation. Certain gods receive offerings not raised upward on bright altars, but directed downward into the ground. Libations may be poured into pits or earth. Animals may be sacrificed in ways that differ from offerings to Olympian gods. The details vary by place and period, and scholars still debate many local practices, but the broad distinction matters. The earth itself becomes an altar when the intended powers belong beneath it. A place is associated with Demeter and Persephone. The connection between descent, grief, fertility, and return becomes especially strong. The story of Persephone's movement between the upper world and the underworld expresses a deep agricultural rhythm, loss and return, seed and harvest, winter and renewal. But it is not merely a pleasant seasonal tale. It carries darkness inside it. The earth gives grain, yet it also opens for the dead. The mother mourns, the daughter descends, the fields fail, and only through a fragile arrangement does life continue. Sacred spaces connected with these deities often hold that emotional tension. They are about nourishment, but also absence. They offer hope, but only after descent. The Eleusinian mysteries centered near Athens are among the most famous examples, though they remain partly hidden from us because secrecy was essential to them. Initiates experienced rites connected with Demeter and Persephone, and ancient writers treat the experience as profound, even transformative. Yet the exact sequence of what participants saw, heard, and understood remains uncertain. The evidence is incomplete by design, The secrecy was not an inconvenience for historians. It was part of the ritual's power. What survives suggests procession, purification, sacred objects, dramatic revelation, and the promise of a changed relationship to death. But no responsible account can pretend to reconstruct it fully. Here the lost temple is not only underground in stone, it is underground in memory. Oracle sites add another layer. At Delphi, the sanctuary of Apollo is famously built against a dramatic mountain landscape, not hidden in a deep cave in the simplest sense. Yet the prophetic imagination there is tied to the Earth's openings, older powers, and the idea that divine knowledge can rise from below. Elsewhere in the Greek world, caves and chasms more explicitly serve as places of prophecy or contact with the dead. Necromantic traditions, especially those connected with entrances to the underworld, reveal a more unsettling side of ancient religion. People seek knowledge not only from shining gods, but from the dead, from darkness, from places where ordinary boundaries feel weakened. The evidence for specific rituals is often debated, and later literary descriptions can exaggerate or reshape local practice. But the attraction of such places is clear enough. The underground promises access to what the living cannot normally know. In the Minoan and broader Aegean world, caves also hold sacred importance. On Crete, cave sanctuaries contain offerings such as figurines, pottery, tools, weapons, and other objects, deposited in spaces where natural formations, darkness, and sometimes water create a powerful setting. Some caves are linked in later tradition with divine birth or mythic events. But archaeologists must be careful not to force later Greek stories backward onto earlier Bronze Age practice. What survives in the record suggests repeated ritual use, but the exact beliefs behind it remain partly out of reach. Still, the pattern is familiar. People climb or descend into difficult natural places, bring offerings, and leave them where the earth itself seems to hold divine presence. Rome inherits, adapts, and multiplies these underground meanings. Roman religion is often practical, legal, public, and civic, but it also contains deep concern for the dead, the household, the ancestors, and the powers below. Tombs line roads outside cities, catacombs later spread beneath urban edges, shrines, caves, and subterranean rooms become settings for mystery cults, healing rites, and restricted ceremonies. The god Mithras, worshipped in the Roman Empire by groups of initiates, is especially associated with underground or cave-like sanctuaries known as Mithraea. Many were built below buildings or made to imitate caves, with benches along the sides and a central image of the god slaying the bull. Their enclosed darkness was not accidental. It shaped the experience of belonging to a hidden ritual community. Mithraea show how the cave idea could be recreated artificially in an urban world. A worshipper in a crowded Roman city did not need a natural mountain cavern. A room beneath a house, barracks, bath complex, or street could be shaped into a symbolic cave. The ceiling might be low, the light controlled, the space intimate and restricted. The underground here is not prehistoric wilderness. It is secrecy built into the infrastructure of empire. Above, the city runs on law, trade, soldiers, noise, and public monuments. Below, a small group gathers in darkness around images whose full ritual meaning remains debated. The contrast is striking, and very Mediterranean public order above, hidden devotion below. Healing sanctuaries also use descent in subtler ways. In some ancient healing cults, especially those associated with Asclepius, sacred sleep, dreams, and enclosed spaces become part of the search for cure. Not all such practices are underground, but many rely on withdrawal from ordinary life into a controlled sacred environment. The body lies down, the senses soften, and healing is sought through dream, ritual, and divine presence. This reminds us that the underground is not always about death. It can also be about recovery, incubation, and the hope that hidden forces will restore balance. By the time the Mediterranean world becomes layered with Greek, Roman, local, and later religious traditions, Many sacred caves and subterranean rooms have accumulated several meanings at once. A cave may begin as a Bronze Age offering place, become tied to a Greek myth, attract Roman visitors, be reused by later communities, and eventually enter folklore as a haunted hollow or saint's refuge. The original ritual may be lost, but the sense that the place matters survives. This is how sacred geography endures after theology changes. The cave keeps its authority even when people forget why. The Mediterranean underground therefore reveals a world far more shadowed than its marble ruins suggest. Beneath temples of sunlight are gods of soil and tomb. Beneath civic ritual are mysteries kept from the uninitiated. Beneath mythic beauty are grief, fear, prophecy, and the careful management of the dead. The descent continues, not as a rejection of the bright world, but as its necessary counterpart. For every column raised to the sky, there is a pit, a cave, a crypt, a spring, or a sealed chamber reminding the ancient mind that the sacred does not only shine, sometimes it listens from below. Not every temple beneath the earth was placed there by ritual. Some were forced downward by catastrophe. A sanctuary could stand for centuries in the open air, receiving footsteps, offerings, smoke, songs, and repairs, until one season the ground moved, the mountain opened, the river changed its course, or the sea arrived where no sea had been before. Then the sacred building passed from human care into geological time. Columns fell, roofs broke, courtyards filled with mud, painted walls disappeared under ash, doorways became pockets of darkness. The temple did not descend because priests wanted secrecy. It descended because the world itself refused to remain stable. Earthquakes are among the most common agents of sacred ruin, especially around the Mediterranean, Anatolia, the Near East, and many other tectonically restless regions. Ancient builders often knew they lived with tremors, but knowledge did not mean control. A temple could be repaired after one quake, strengthened after another, and then destroyed when a stronger shock arrived without warning. Stone drums from columns might scatter across courtyards like fallen wheels. Roof beams could collapse into inner rooms. Statues could break at the ankles or neck. A sanctuary that had once expressed cosmic order could become, in a few moments, a lesson in how fragile order really was. What survives in the record often shows repeated cycles of damage, rebuilding, reuse, and eventual abandonment, though scholars still debate the exact sequence at many ruined sites. The strange thing about earthquake destruction is that it can preserve as well as erase. A collapsed roof may crush what lies below, but it can also seal a room from later disturbance. A blocked doorway may trap lamps, vessels, tools, bones, and ritual objects in the positions they held near the final use of the space. A floor buried under fallen masonry can become a frozen surface of human activity. Archaeologists are cautious with the phrase "frozen in time," because even disaster layers can be disturbed by looters, weather, animals, later rebuilding or slow decay. Still, catastrophe sometimes creates unusually sharp archaeological moments. It closes the book suddenly, leaving pages stuck together. Volcanic eruptions create an even more dramatic kind of burial. Ash does not merely knock buildings down, it falls, fills, smothers, and seals. At sites overwhelmed by volcanic material, sacred spaces can disappear so completely that later generations may forget they ever stood there. The most famous ancient example is Pompeii, where temples, household shrines, streets, bodies, paintings, and everyday objects were buried by the eruption of Vesuvius in the year 79. Pompeii was not a lost underground temple in the original sense, but its burial shows how an entire urban religious world can pass beneath layers of disaster. Public sanctuaries, domestic altars, statues, ritual objects, and wall paintings all became part of an accidental underworld. The gods of the city did not save the city from the mountain. History rarely offers irony gently. Further back in the Bronze Age, the eruption of Thera, now Santorini, transformed the Aegean world in ways still debated. The settlement of Akrotiri was buried under volcanic deposits, preserving buildings, paintings, vessels, and traces of a sophisticated island community. Whether and how the eruption contributed to wider disruptions in Minoan Crete remains a matter of scholarly discussion. No single explanation fully accounts for the complex changes that followed across the region. Yet the eruption itself remains a powerful example of nature burying a human world so thoroughly that it becomes accessible only through excavation. Sacred rooms, ritual objects, and symbolic images at such sites are not hidden by religious design. They're hidden by ash, pressure, and time. Floods perform a slower but equally relentless burial. Rivers that nourish civilizations also drown their sacred places. A shrine built beside a spring, marsh, river bank, or harbour may be sacred precisely because of the water, yet that same water can destroy it. Flood silt fills rooms grain by grain. Foundations weaken. Mud settles over floors and offerings. In river valleys, temples may be rebuilt higher again and again until the sacred site becomes a mound of accumulated flaws, repairs, flood layers, and abandoned surfaces. The temple remains in one place, but the ground around it rises with each generation's attempt to survive the next inundation. What looks like a hill may be a stack of human persistence. Coastal change adds another kind of disappearance. Harbours silt up, shorelines shift, land subsides, storms break through barriers. In some places, ancient sacred buildings now lie underwater or partly buried beneath marine sediments. These are not always temples in the grand monumental sense. They may be shrines, harbour sanctuaries, ritual platforms, or sacred zones connected with trade and seafaring. But their loss reveals how closely ancient religion was tied to unstable environments. A sanctuary near the sea could honour a god of protection, commerce, fertility, or safe passage, while standing in a place that was always vulnerable to the same waters that made it meaningful. The evidence remains incomplete in many submerged sites because underwater archaeology is difficult, expensive, and easily disturbed. But what has been found shows that sacred landscapes did not end at the old shoreline. Landslides and erosion bury temples more quietly. A hillside loosened by rain can cover a cave shrine. A cliff can collapse over a rock-cut sanctuary. Desert sand can drift slowly into courtyards until only the highest stones remain visible. In some regions, abandonment does almost as much work as disaster. Once a temple is no longer maintained, nature begins dismantling it patiently. Roofs fail, walls crack, plants enter joints in the masonry. Wind carries dust. Animals nest in corners once reserved for offerings. A sacred building does not need one dramatic catastrophe to be lost. Neglect, climate, and sediment can be just as final, only less cinematic. Human catastrophe also buries temples, walk and burn sanctuaries, topple statues, and leave sacred spaces abandoned under rubble. Conquest can transform temples into fortresses, churches, mosques, houses, quarries, or ruins. Sometimes the defeated sacred place is deliberately covered, built over, or erased to make room for a new order. At other times, people hide cult objects, seal rooms, or bury offerings in fear that invaders will take them. The archaeology of such moments is difficult because destruction layers can mix violence, ritual closure, looting, and later cleanup. A burned temple may indicate attack, accident, political change, or a combination of causes. The ground preserves evidence, but rarely the complete story. What all these disasters share is a reversal of human intention. Temples are built to organize time, to repeat festivals, to stabilize memory, to keep the relationship between people and powers in proper form. Disaster breaks repetition. It interrupts the calendar. It turns the place of offering into the place of loss. Yet in doing so, it sometimes gives the future a gift. The buried sanctuary becomes a sealed witness. Ash preserves wall paintings. Mud protects wooden objects. Collapse shields floors from later rebuilding. Sand hides inscriptions from weather. The same forces that end worship may preserve the trace of worship more faithfully than continuous use would have done. This is why lost temples beneath the earth often feel haunted by two kinds of silence. One is intentional, the silence of hidden chambers, restricted rites, and sacred concealment. The other is accidental, the silence after earthquake, flood, eruption, war, and abandonment. Both can place a temple underground, but they mean different things. One belongs to ritual, the other belongs to catastrophe. Archaeology must listen carefully enough to tell them apart, though the evidence does not always cooperate. Beneath the soil, a sealed doorway and a collapsed doorway can look deceptively similar. A buried offering and a dropped object can rest side by side. A sacred ending and a violent interruption can share the same dust. And so the descent continues through ruined landscapes. A temple once bright with painted walls lies under volcanic ash. A riverside shrine sleeps under silt. A cave sanctuary is closed by fallen rock. A city temple becomes a mound where shepherds later walk without knowing what their feet cross. The earth does not remember as humans remember. It does not preserve meanings out of kindness. It covers, compresses, stains, breaks, and protects without preference. But sometimes, by accident, it keeps just enough. A fallen column, a lamp under rubble, a painted fragment, a threshold worn smooth by vanished feet. From these, the lost sacred world begins to rise again. Some buried sacred places are lost because the world crushes them. Others are lost because human hands close them. This difference matters, though it is not always easy to see at first. A collapsed passage may look like a blocked passage. A shaft filled by flood water may resemble one deliberately packed with stones. A chamber sealed after a ritual may be mistaken for a room abandoned in haste. Beneath the earth, intention and accident often wear the same colour of dust. Yet when archaeologists look closely, certain patterns begin to emerge, stones arranged too carefully to be random, layers of clean fill brought from elsewhere, objects placed in meaningful groups, doorways closed with slabs, and offerings buried where no one was expected to retrieve them. These are not simply traces of disappearance, they are signs of closure. A sealed space has a different emotional weight from a ruined space. Ruin suggests failure, decay, interruption, or defeat. Sealing suggests decision. Someone stood at the threshold and chose that the chamber should no longer remain open. Someone filled the shaft, covered the floor, blocked the doorway, or placed one last object inside before darkness became permanent. It may have been done with sorrow, fear, reverence, practical caution, or ritual necessity. The evidence remains incomplete, because the final act rarely explains itself, but the physical gesture survives. The space was ended, not merely left. This kind of ending appears in many forms. In some ancient temples, sacred objects were buried beneath floors or placed inside foundations before construction continued above them. These deposits were not meant for human admiration. They were hidden from the moment they were created. A small figurine, a vessel, a tool, a bead, an animal bone, a handful of grain, or a symbolic object could be placed below a wall or threshold to anchor the building in a ritual order. The act was both beginning and burial at once. Something went into the earth so the temple above could live. What survives in the record suggests that many ancient communities believed buildings needed more than engineering. They needed hidden consent from powers below. Other sealed spaces mark endings rather than beginnings. A shrine might be closed when a community moved away. when a cult changed, when a temple was rebuilt, or when a sacred object lost its proper role. In such cases, the closure could be respectful. Objects might be broken deliberately, not because they were worthless, but because they had to be removed from ordinary use. A vessel shattered and buried in a sacred context may not be trash. It may be a ritual death, a figurine placed face down, a stone covered with pigment, a lamp left near a blocked doorway, or a pile of bones arranged in a pit may signal that the space was being retired. Scholars still debate how to distinguish ritual breakage from ordinary damage, and caution is essential. Still, repeated patterns can reveal that some objects were not discarded casually. They were transformed by burial. There is something deeply human in the decision to close a sacred place properly. People do similar things in many eras. They retire flags, bury time capsules, seal tombs, cover graves, close churches, remove statues, preserve relics, or place documents in foundations. The desire is not only practical, it is moral. A place that has held meaning cannot always be abandoned like an empty shed. It must be answered. Ancient sealed chambers may preserve that answer in material form. The words are gone, but the gesture remains. Filled shafts are among the most puzzling examples. A shaft can be practical, symbolic, or both. It may connect to water, to storage, to burial, to ventilation, to construction activity, or to a hidden chamber. When such shafts are intentionally filled, archaeologists must ask why. Was the shaft dangerous and closed for safety? Was it sealed to protect a tomb? Was it filled after a ritual descent? Was it used for offerings over time, gradually accumulating objects? Or did later people simply dump debris into an old opening? No single explanation fully accounts for all cases. The soil itself has to be read through layers, materials, and context. Clean packing stones, repeated offerings, careful capping, or unusual deposits may point towards ceremony. Mixed rubble, broken roof material, and erosion may point toward collapse or cleanup. Often the truth is somewhere between. Hidden chambers carry even stronger expectations, especially in the modern imagination. People love the idea of a secret room. A blocked door under a temple instantly invites speculation about treasure, forbidden knowledge, lost kings, or mysteries deliberately concealed from history. Sometimes hidden chambers do contain extraordinary material, but just as often they contain emptiness, debris, secondary burials, disturbed remains, or ordinary ritual objects made powerful by context rather than wealth. The value of a sealed space is not measured only in gold. A sealed chamber can preserve a floor undisturbed by later feet, a pattern of lamps, a painted surface protected from weather, or a final arrangement of offerings. In archaeology, silence can be richer than treasure. There are also spaces sealed because they were feared. Not every sacred power was comforting. Some places may have been closed to contain pollution, danger, memory, or the restless dead. In cultures where improper burial, violent death, broken taboo, or divine anger carried serious consequences, sealing could become a form of control. A chamber might be blocked not to honor what was inside, but to keep it from returning. The difficulty is that fear and reverence can leave similar traces. A carefully sealed doorway might protect a sacred image, guard a tomb, contain danger, or mark the end of a ritual cycle. The stones do not tell us which emotion guided the hands that placed them. The deliberate burial of entire sacred structures is especially striking. When a sanctuary is filled in and covered, as happened at some prehistoric and ancient sites, the act seems almost paradoxical. Why invest labor in building a place, then invest more labor in hiding it? The answer may lie in a different understanding of sacred time. A temple or ritual enclosure may not have been meant to last forever in active use. It may have had a life cycle creation: use, renewal, retirement, burial. Just as a body is buried after death, a sacred building might be returned to the earth after its purpose ended. This idea cannot be applied everywhere, but where the evidence shows careful filling rather than random collapse, it becomes a serious possibility. The final deposits in sealed spaces often feel like messages, though they were not messages for us. A last lamp near an entrance, a cluster of vessels placed in a corner, a foundation pit closed under a wall, a human or animal burial beneath a floor, a carved stone hidden where no visitor could see it. These acts suggest audiences beyond ordinary human sight: gods, ancestors, the earth, the dead, or the future of the building itself may have been the intended witnesses. The modern archaeologist becomes an accidental latecomer, arriving long after the intended relationship has ended. This is why sealed spaces remain among the most haunting features of underground archaeology. They bring us close to the moment when ancient people decided that a sacred place had crossed a boundary. It would no longer be entered. It would no longer receive ordinary worship. It would no longer belong to daylight, procession, repair, or daily memory. Instead, it would pass into stillness. The ceiling stones were placed, the shaft was packed, the chamber was covered, and the sacred world withdrew beneath the surface. And yet the act failed in one important way. Sealing was meant to end access, but it also preserved the trace of that ending. The closed doorway still speaks through its stones. The filled shaft still holds its layers. The buried objects still wait in their final arrangement. Human intention, once hidden, becomes visible again through patient excavation. What was meant for gods, ancestors, or silence returns as evidence. Not complete evidence, never complete, but enough to show that ancient people did not only build temples, they also knew how to close them, and sometimes the closing was as sacred as the building itself. When the buried sacred world returns, it rarely returns as a complete temple. More often it begins with a disturbance so small that no one would call it a discovery at first. A stone appears in a ploughed field where no stone should be. A wall line shows as a dry mark in summer grass. A worker clearing earth finds a fragment of carved relief. A shepherd notices that cold air moves from a crack in a hillside. A road crew cuts through a layer of ash, bone, pottery, and older floor. The ancient underground does not announce itself like a story. It leaks upward through accidents. Modern archaeology has learned to treat these small signs with patience, because the first visible clue is often only the edge of a much larger pattern. A broken pot may mark a settlement. A single carved block may have been reused from a temple centuries after the temple itself fell. A pit filled with ash may be domestic waste, ritual burning, destruction debris, or a mixture of all three. The evidence remains incomplete until context gathers around it. Where was it found? What layer held it? What objects lay nearby? Was the soil packed deliberately or washed in by water? Did the stones fall from above, or were they arranged by hand? The sacred underground is not discovered only by digging. It is discovered by asking the soil how it came to be that way. The earliest explorers of ancient underground spaces often moved with more courage than method. They entered tunnels with candles, ropes, notebooks, and sometimes more enthusiasm than caution. Some recorded carefully, others removed objects, widened entrances, damaged paintings with smoke, or treated sealed chambers as treasure rooms. Archaeology as a discipline grew partly by learning from these mistakes. A buried temple is not merely a container of things. It is a web of relationships between objects, layers, surfaces, architecture, and absence. Remove an offering from its place without recording it, and part of its meaning is gone forever. In underground archaeology, context can be as precious as gold, and often far more informative. Excavating a sacred chamber requires a kind of slowness that can feel almost unnatural. The modern mind wants revelation, the door opens, the lamp shines, the mystery is solved. The real work is usually dustier, colder, and more repetitive. Sediment is removed in controlled layers. Stones are mapped before they're moved. Fragments are numbered. Charcoal is sampled. Pigments are tested. Bones are examined to see whether they belong to food, offerings, burials, intruding animals, or later disturbance. The position of a lamp, a bead, a seed, or a flake of plaster can matter. What looks like dirt to an impatient visitor may be the very layer that explains whether a chamber was sealed, abandoned, flooded, robbed, or ritually closed. Workers are central to this story, though they're too often left in the background. Local labourers, guides, conservators, surveyors, students, engineers, and specialists make discoveries possible. In many famous excavations, the person who first noticed the clue was not the celebrated director, but someone whose daily familiarity with the land made them attentive to small changes. A hollow sound underfoot, a different colour of soil, a worked stone turned up by a tool, a draught in a passage. These details require eyes trained by repetition. The lost temple beneath the earth is not found by romance alone. It is found by hands that know soil, stone, weight, and danger. Danger is real. Underground spaces can collapse. Ancient shafts may be unstable. Air can be poor. Flooded chambers can hide deep mud or sudden drops. Painted walls can be damaged by breath, humidity, heat, and light after surviving for centuries in stable darkness. The moment of discovery can become the moment of destruction if the environment changes too quickly. This is one of the quiet tragedies of excavation. To study a sealed place, one must open it. To understand what darkness preserved, one must bring in light. Archaeology is always a negotiation with loss, and nowhere is that clearer than underground. New technologies have changed the search. Ground-penetrating radar, electrical resistivity, magnetometry, LiDAR, laser scanning, photogrammetry, satellite imagery, and robotic cameras allow researchers to detect or record hidden spaces without immediately tearing them open. A buried wall can appear as a pattern in geophysical data. A void behind stone can be suggested by changes in density or temperature. A landscape covered in vegetation can reveal old platforms, roads, terraces, and mounds when scanned from above. Remote sensing does not replace excavation, and it can be misleading if interpreted too eagerly. But it helps archaeologists ask better questions before the first trench is cut. In some cases, tiny cameras enter where humans cannot. A crack, a drilled hole, or a narrow shaft may allow a glimpse into a sealed cavity. The images are often frustrating dust, rough stone, fallen debris, perhaps a line that might be a wall or a shadow. Popular imagination wants immediate certainty, but science often advances through controlled disappointment. A void may prove to be natural. A suspected chamber may be empty. A dramatic anomaly may come from later disturbance or geological variation. Scholars still debate many such findings, especially when early reports move faster than careful publication. The underground rewards caution more than excitement. Inscriptions, when they survive, can feel like sudden speech after long silence. A name carved on a wall, a dedication, a ritual text, a mason's mark, or a painted sign can connect architecture to people, gods, dates, and actions. But inscriptions are never the whole story. Many underground sacred places have no writing at all. Others carry texts added long after the original use. Some inscriptions are damaged, reused, or removed from their first context. Even when words survive, they must be read beside the material evidence. A text may say what people wanted to be true, while the soil shows what actually happened. Fragments often tell the deeper story. A statue broken and buried may reveal a change in worship. A foundation deposit may show how a building began. A layer of soot may show repeated torch use in a chamber that was otherwise empty. Seeds can suggest offerings, meals, seasons, or ritual plants. Pollen may reveal flowers brought into a space where flowers could not grow. Isotopes in bones can show where animals or people came from. Residue inside vessels can identify oils, wine, milk, resins, or other substances once poured, burned, stored, or offered. The sacred underground is read not only through monuments, but through microscopic traces of action. Conservation has become as important as discovery. A chamber exposed to modern air may need controlled humidity, limited access, special lighting, structural support, and constant monitoring. The goal is not only to reveal the past, but to keep it from vanishing after revelation. This can frustrate the public, because the most fragile places are often the most fascinating and the least accessible. Yet protection is part of respect. A temple hidden for 3,000 years should not be destroyed by 3 decades of careless admiration. The modern excavation of underground temples therefore carries a strange humility. Researchers arrive with tools more precise than anything ancient builders imagined, yet they face questions that cannot always be answered. Why was this room sealed? Who entered this cave? What did this offering mean? Was the final layer an act of fear, grief, renewal, or simple cleanup? No single explanation fully accounts for every clue. Still, each careful discovery adds a little light, a mapped passage, a dated charcoal sample, a reconstructed vessel, a preserved footprint, a pigment trace, a name, a hidden chamber that proves to be less spectacular than legend but more intimate than treasure. The buried sacred world rises slowly, not as restored certainty, but as a pattern of human gestures. People descended, they carried fire, they placed objects where no ordinary eyes would see them. They sealed rooms, buried ancestors, carved stone, painted walls, and returned to daylight. Modern archaeology follows them in reverse, entering through cracks, fragments, instruments, and patient questions. The lost temple is never fully recovered. But in the careful meeting between ancient darkness and modern attention, something of its meaning becomes visible again. The underground has always been fertile ground for invention. A ruined wall in daylight is usually forced to remain a wall. A buried passage, however, can become almost anything in the imagination before it is excavated. Darkness invites projection. A sealed door suggests a secret. A tunnel suggests escape, hidden worship, lost kings, forbidden knowledge, or a civilization that chose to vanish beneath the surface. The less that is known, the more confidently stories tend to grow around it. This is one reason lost temples beneath the earth attract not only archaeologists, but dreamers, treasure hunters, mystics, frauds, and storytellers who prefer mystery without discipline. Some of these stories are harmless, even poetic. Local legends often preserve a sense that a cave, mound, spring, or ruin matters, even when the original history has vanished. A village may remember an underground road to a castle, a sleeping king under a hill, a hidden chapel sealed by monks, a golden idol buried beneath a field, or a curse attached to a blocked doorway. Most such tales cannot be taken literally, yet they should not be dismissed as meaningless. Folklore can hold emotional memory. It may preserve the fact that a place was old, feared, restricted, or associated with the dead. Sometimes a legend points archaeologists toward a real site, though the story wrapped around it has changed beyond recognition. What survives in memory is not always accurate, but it can still be a trace. The danger begins when legend is treated as evidence by itself. A cave becomes proof of a lost empire, a carved stone becomes a star map, a drainage tunnel becomes a temple of impossible science, a natural rock formation becomes an altar of a vanished priesthood, a chamber with no writing becomes a library whose books were supposedly removed just before discovery. The pattern is familiar. Uncertainty is not treated as uncertainty, but as permission to invent. Scholars still debate many ancient sites, but serious debate begins with material evidence, not with the most dramatic possibility. The evidence remains incomplete in many places, and that incompleteness is exactly why caution matters. One recurring claim imagines vast underground civilizations far older than any known culture, spreading beneath continents through networks of tunnels and temples. These stories often borrow real features: subterranean cities in Anatolia, catacombs, mines, caves, cisterns, tombs, drainage systems, rock-cut shrines, and refuge complexes. Then they connect them into a hidden world for which no archaeological pattern exists. Real underground sites are impressive enough without being forced into a single global conspiracy. They were built in specific landscapes, with specific tools, for specific needs, by communities facing practical, religious, political, and environmental pressures. Their similarities often come from shared human problems, not from a secret worldwide plan. Ancient super technology is another popular shadow cast over underground temples. Smooth stone, careful alignment, deep chambers, acoustic effects, and difficult engineering are sometimes presented as proof that ancient people must have possessed lost machines, hidden energy systems, or knowledge from visitors beyond ordinary history. These claims usually underestimate ancient skill while pretending to admire ancient achievement. Human beings with stone tools, copper tools, bronze tools, iron tools, ropes, sledges, levers, ramps, measuring cords, patient labour, and generations of specialized knowledge could accomplish far more than modern observers often imagine. No unsupported machine is needed to explain the existence of a carved chamber or a massive stone passage. The real mystery is not that ancient people needed impossible help. It is that they organized ordinary human effort with extraordinary persistence. There are also claims that every underground sacred site hides forbidden religious truth deliberately suppressed by later authorities. Sometimes, of course, religious change did lead to concealment, destruction, reuse, or silence. Temples were converted, images were buried, caves were reinterpreted, sacred objects were hidden during periods of danger. But the broad fantasy of a single hidden doctrine preserved intact beneath ruins is usually unsupported. Ancient religion was diverse, local, changing, and often internally contradictory. A buried chamber may reveal ritual practice, but it rarely unlocks one secret key to all ancient belief. The past is not a puzzle box designed for modern revelation. It is a damaged human world. False temples can arise from honest mistakes as well as fantasy. A storage room may be mistaken for a sanctuary because it contains unusual objects. A tomb may be called a temple because it has paintings. A cistern may be described as a ritual chamber because it lies underground and feels dramatic. A quarry may resemble a sacred cave. A natural formation may look intentionally carved. Archaeology spends much of its time separating use from appearance. The question is not whether a space feels sacred to modern visitors, but whether the evidence supports ritual activity in its original context. Offerings, repeated deposits, architecture, wear patterns, iconography, human remains, inscriptions, associated structures, and careful dating all matter. Atmosphere alone is not enough. This distinction can disappoint people. The world wants hidden temples, not drainage channels. It wants priestly secrets, not storage pits. It wants golden idols, not broken lamps and animal bones. Yet the less glamorous explanation is often more revealing. A cistern shows how a community survived drought. A storage chamber shows planning and risk. A refuge tunnel shows fear. A tomb reused as a shelter shows social collapse or practical adaptation. These are not lesser stories. They are simply less theatrical. They bring ancient people closer rather than turning them into symbols in someone else's fantasy. Fraud has also shaped the underground imagination. Forged inscriptions, planted artifacts, exaggerated discoveries, and sensational claims have appeared wherever money, fame, nationalism, or spiritual authority can be gained from the ancient past. A sealed chamber is especially vulnerable to such exploitation because few people can inspect it directly. Photographs can be staged, objects can be removed from context, rumours can spread faster than careful reports. Once a false claim enters popular culture, it can survive long after specialists have rejected it. The underground keeps secrets, but modern media can manufacture them. Still, skepticism should not harden into cynicism. Real discoveries do happen, hidden rooms are found, long-disputed sites become clearer, old assumptions are overturned by new dating, careful excavation, or technologies that reveal buried architecture. Archaeology has repeatedly shown that the ancient world was more complex than earlier scholars believed. The correct response to uncertainty is not to close imagination, but to discipline it. Good mystery does not require abandoning evidence. In fact, evidence makes mystery stronger because it gives the unknown a shape. The most compelling underground temples are not the ones surrounded by the loudest legends. They are the ones where small facts refuse to become simple. A chamber sealed with care but without explanation. A cave visited for thousands of years by people who left no writing. A sanctuary buried deliberately after generations of use. A well filled with objects too patterned to be trash and too varied to be easily interpreted. These places do not need invented civilizations or impossible machines. Their real power lies in the distance between what can be shown and what can only be approached. The task, then, is not to drain the underground of wonder. It is to protect wonder from distortion. A false mystery consumes the past and replaces it with a mirror of modern desires. A real mystery allows the past to remain difficult, partial, and human. Lost temples beneath the earth are fascinating because they are not fully ours. They resist possession. They force patience. They remind us that ancient people lived with meanings that cannot always be translated into modern categories. The darkness below the temple is not empty, but neither is it an invitation to believe everything. It is a place where evidence must be followed carefully, lamp by lamp, until imagination and discipline walk together. The earth does not preserve the past evenly. It is not a careful librarian, placing every human gesture in order and protecting each page from damage. It is selective, indifferent, and often brutal. It crushes some things, stains others, dissolves wood, scatters bones, cracks plaster, and turns whole buildings into anonymous layers of soil. Yet in certain hidden places, especially beneath temples, inside caves, under collapsed roofs, or behind sealed doors, the earth can become a strangely patient guardian. Darkness slows fading. Stable air protects pigment. Dryness keeps textiles from vanishing. Mud can seal a floor so tightly that the last arrangement of objects remains almost untouched. What is lost is immense, but what survives can be intimate enough to feel like intrusion. The underground preserves first by removing things from weather. Sunlight is beautiful, but it is destructive. Rain enters stone. Wind carries sand that abrades surfaces grain by grain. Heat and cold expand and contract walls until painted plaster flakes away. Human hands touch, repair, steal, and reuse. A sacred object left above ground is rarely left alone for long. Beneath the surface, conditions may become steadier. A chamber sealed from light can protect colours that would have faded in open air. A cave wall can hold pigment for tens of thousands of years if moisture, minerals, and human disturbance do not destroy it. A tomb in dry desert can preserve wood, linen, leather, basketry, seeds, and even traces of scent that would disappear almost anywhere else. This preservation is never guaranteed. Moisture can be merciless. A sealed chamber that seems protected may become a trap for humidity, salt, mould, or mineral deposits. Floodwater can carry objects from their original places and leave them in misleading arrangements. Roots can enter through cracks and split masonry slowly. Burrowing animals can mix layers that once had clear meaning. The evidence remains incomplete because every underground space has its own chemistry, temperature, airflow, and history of disturbance. Still, when conditions are right, the earth can hold small details that above-ground ruins almost never keep. Smoke marks are among those details. On the ceiling of a cave or chamber, black stains can record ancient light. They reveal where lamps burned, where torches passed, where people paused, and sometimes how often a space was entered. A single mark may not say much, but a pattern of soot can help reconstruct movement. If smoke concentrates near certain paintings, niches, or passages, it suggests repeated attention. If lamp remains are found on the floor below, the connection becomes stronger. In some places, the very act of bringing light underground has left a map of ritual behaviour. Fire disappears quickly when it burns in the open air, but underground it can leave its shadow on stone. Pigment survives in equally revealing ways. A painted animal, a hand stencil, a line on plaster, or a coloured patch on a statue fragment can show not only image but technique. Microscopic study can identify charcoal, ochre, manganese, gypsum, lime, copper-based blues or greens, and other materials. Sometimes the source of a pigment can be traced, suggesting trade, travel, or deliberate selection. A colour in a hidden chamber may have come from far away, carried into darkness because it mattered. Scholars still debate the meanings of many colours and images, but the material facts themselves are powerful. Someone gathered mineral earth, prepared it, mixed it, touched it to stone, and expected the mark to endure. Bones are more complicated, but they can speak in many registers. Human remains may reveal burial customs, age, sex, health, diet, disease, injury, kinship, migration, and treatment after death. Animal bones can show feasting, sacrifice, offerings, ordinary meals, craft production, intrusion by predators, or natural accumulation. Cut marks, burning, breakage, placement, and association with other objects all matter. A goat bone in a temple courtyard is not automatically an offering. A bird placed carefully in a pit is not automatically dinner. Context decides. No single explanation fully accounts for every deposit. But when bones are preserved underground, they can show how sacred acts were tied to food, blood, death, and social obligation. Seeds are quieter but sometimes even more surprising. Charred grain, grape pips, date stones, fig seeds, flower pollen, and plant fibers can survive in sealed or burned deposits. They may reveal offerings, ritual meals, incense ingredients, garlands, agricultural cycles, or trade connections. In a buried sanctuary, a handful of seeds can tell us what season a ritual may have occurred, what crops mattered to a community, or what plants were brought into a place where they did not naturally grow. The ancient sacred world was not made only of stone and belief. It had smells, meals, flowers, oils, smoke, and decay. The underground can preserve enough of these traces to restore texture to ceremonies that would otherwise seem abstract. Textiles are among the rarest gifts of preservation. In most climates, cloth disappears almost completely, leaving only impressions, fibres, stains, or metal objects that once fastened it. But in dry tombs, salt-rich environments, caves, or sealed spaces, fabric may survive. A fragment of linen wrapped around an offering, a woven bag, a cord, a sandal, a ritual garment, or a burial shroud can bring ancient hands startlingly close. Textile work contains time. It records spinning, dyeing, weaving, mending, folding, and use. A temple may impress through architecture, but a preserved thread reminds us that sacred life was also made by fingers, repeating small movements with care. Footprints and floor surfaces preserve action more directly than almost anything else. A worn threshold shows repeated passage. A polished step records thousands of feet. A clay floor can hold a heel mark, a child's footprint, a dragged object, or the imprint of a mat. Sometimes archaeologists can see where people avoided a central area, gathered near a wall, stood before a niche, or moved along a repeated path. These are not grand events, yet they return the body to the temple. Sacred places were not only designed, they were used, touched, crossed, cleaned, damaged, repaired, and inhabited by movement. Even emptiness can be preserved. A sealed room without treasure may still contain undisturbed airspace, untouched sediment, and the absence of later intrusion. Empty niches may show where statues once stood. Clean floors may show that objects were removed before closure. A blocked doorway may preserve the final decision to deny entry. Archaeology often learns from what is missing, though absence is difficult to interpret. Was an object stolen, ritually removed, never placed there, or made from material that decayed? The answer is rarely certain. Still, preserved emptiness can be as meaningful as a crowded deposit. What the earth preserves most of all is not belief itself, but the outline of belief in action. It keeps the lamp, not the prayer, the pigment, not the myth, the seed, not the hymn, the bones, not the fear or gratitude that placed them there. The hidden temple remains partly silent, yet its silence is not blank. It is filled with residues of touch, heat, colour, breath, weight, and repeated return. These traces do not solve the ancient sacred world, but they rescue it from pure imagination. They show that beneath the earth, mystery is made of physical things: ash under a fingernail, red dust on stone, a footprint hardening in clay, a thread folded beside the dead, a grain of wheat waiting in darkness long after the harvesters are gone. The underground still unsettles people because it asks the imagination to do what daylight does not. Above ground, ruins can be measured against the sky. A broken column, a fallen wall, a weathered statue, even a collapsed city still belongs to the open world of distance and perspective. The eye can move around it, the body can step back, but a buried temple changes the relationship. It surrounds, it encloses, it withholds. The visitor does not stand before the mystery so much as enter it, and that entrance carries an older feeling than history itself. The earth becomes close, and the past no longer seems far away. It seems near enough to breathe against the skin. This is why caves, tombs, crypts, tunnels, and sealed chambers remain so powerful in human storytelling. They are places where time feels layered rather than gone. A person walking through an underground passage is not only moving through space, they are moving through burial, abandonment, memory, and fear. Every wall suggests pressure. Every turn suggests something unseen. Even when the chamber is safe, documented, and professionally lit, the body remembers older dangers. Darkness once meant predators, getting lost, suffocation, falling, spirits, enemies, and the simple terror of not knowing what waits beyond the edge of firelight. Ancient people knew those dangers intimately, and they also knew how to turn them into sacred experience. The emotional power of underground temples begins with silence, not ordinary quiet, but a silence that feels stored. In a buried chamber, sound does not vanish into distance. It stops against stone. A footstep returns. A breath seems too loud. The smallest movement can feel like trespass. This changes how people behave. They lower their voices without being told. They move more slowly. They avoid touching walls. They become aware that others once stood there with very different beliefs, and that those others are gone. The silence does not explain them. It only makes their absence more complete. Reverence often grows from that absence. A temple in use is full of action offerings, cleaning, smoke, songs, repairs, footsteps, rules, disputes, and routine. A lost temple has lost all of that. What remains is the architecture of meaning without the living system that once animated it. A niche is empty. A floor is worn but no procession crosses it. A sealed doorway is opened by people who do not know the words once spoken before it. The result is not simply ignorance. It is a kind of respectful distance. What survives in the record suggests ancient intention, but not always ancient experience. The gap itself becomes part of the haunting. There is also fear, and it should not be dismissed as childish. Fear is one of the ways humans recognize thresholds. The underground temple often sits at the meeting point of several unsettling categories: religion, death, secrecy, confinement, and age. A room built for the dead is not frightening only because bones may lie there. It is frightening because it proves that a human community made a place for crossing out of life. A sealed chamber is not disturbing only because something might be hidden inside. It is disturbing because someone wanted it hidden. A cave sanctuary is not eerie only because it is dark. It is eerie because people once entered that darkness willingly, carrying beliefs that cannot be fully recovered. Modern discovery intensifies this feeling. The moment a sealed or buried sacred space is opened, two times touch awkwardly. The ancient closing and the modern opening become part of the same story, though they were never meant to meet. A chamber may have been sealed for gods, ancestors, protection, or finality, and then, centuries later, instruments, cameras, gloves, lights, and measuring tools cross the threshold. There is a quiet violence in that, even when it is done carefully and ethically. Archaeology must open what others closed. It must disturb in order to understand. No single explanation fully accounts for the emotions people feel at such moments, because discovery is both revelation and intrusion. This is why the public often responds to underground finds with fascination far beyond their material value. A small chamber with soot marks can attract more wonder than a larger ruin in open air. A blocked passage can generate more attention than a wall already exposed. Hiddenness changes value. The mind imagines what has not yet been seen, and even after the chamber is examined, something of that imagined pressure remains. The underground promises that the past may still contain unopened rooms. It offers the possibility that history is not finished giving itself back. But the underground also humbles that desire. Many sealed spaces are modest. They contain no treasure, no dramatic inscription, no statue waiting in perfect condition. They hold broken vessels, sediment, animal bones, lamp fragments, stains, empty niches, or disturbed layers. Yet this modesty is often what makes them real. Ancient sacred life was not made entirely of gold and spectacle. It was made of repeated gestures, small offerings, careful closures, smoke, food, fear, fatigue, and hope. The buried temple haunts us because it shows belief after the grand performance is gone. It leaves the residue of devotion without the certainty of doctrine. There is a surprising comfort in that. Underground temples remind modern people that forgetting is not always complete. A civilization may collapse, a language may vanish, a ritual may stop, but stone can keep the shape of attention, a footprint can remain, a pigment line can survive, a seed can wait in a sealed deposit, a wall can hold smoke from a lamp lit before any living language in the region sounded the same as it does now. The evidence remains incomplete. Yet its survival feels almost defiant. Against erosion, looting, rebuilding, and time, some traces endure. Perhaps that is why buried sacred places return so often in dreams, films, myths, and popular imagination. They satisfy a deep suspicion that the visible world is not the whole world. Beneath houses, cities, roads, farms, deserts, and forests, there may be older rooms, older vows, older fears. The ground underfoot is not just ground. It is a cover over everything people have built, buried, lost, and tried to protect. Every ancient city is, in some sense, an underground city waiting to happen. Every temple is a future ruin. Every sacred object, once placed in darkness, begins a second life outside human time. The underground still haunts us because it reverses confidence. It reminds us that the past is not safely behind us, arranged in museums and books. Much of it is still below, damaged but present, hidden but not gone. To descend into a buried temple is to feel how thin the surface of the present really is. Above, the modern world moves quickly, bright with screens, roads, engines, and noise. Below, a chamber waits in darkness, keeping the slow memory of hands that carved, carried, sealed, and prayed. The people are gone, but their need to make meaning in the dark remains strangely recognizable. What remains beneath the earth is not a single answer, but a long pattern of human attention, across caves, tombs, crypts, buried shrines, sealed shafts, rock-cut chapels, and forgotten chambers. The same movement returns in different forms. People step away from daylight. They enter stone. They carry fire. They leave offerings where ordinary eyes will not see them. They bury the dead beneath floors, place objects in foundations, paint animals in hidden chambers, seal rooms after use, and build over sacred places until the oldest layers vanish under the weight of later memory. The details change from one culture to another, but the impulse is older than any one religion. Human beings keep turning the earth into a keeper of meaning. This does not mean the underground had one universal meaning. It would be too simple to say that every cave was a womb, every tomb a doorway, every shaft a passage to the gods, or every sealed chamber an act of fear. Ancient worlds were more varied than that. A chamber beneath an Egyptian monument does not mean the same thing as a painted Paleolithic cave, a Mithric sanctuary under a Roman street, a buried Neolithic enclosure, or an Anatolian refuge carved into volcanic stone. Scholars still debate the exact purpose of many such places, and the evidence remains incomplete even at well-studied sites. Yet difference does not erase resemblance. Again and again, the underground becomes a place where ordinary categories loosen. It is shelter and danger, grave and seedbed, memory and forgetting, concealment and preservation. The sacred underground reveals ancient religion not as a set of neat doctrines, but as a set of actions shaped by landscape. Before belief becomes text, it is movement, material, and place. A person descends, a lamp is lit, a hand touches stone, a vessel is broken, a body is lowered, a doorway is sealed, a spring is approached with care. These gestures are not footnotes to religion, they are religion in its physical form. They show that sacred experience was not only something thought or said, It was something performed with the whole body inside a world that felt alive with hidden forces. The underground also exposes how closely ancient people tied the sacred to time. Above ground, buildings are repaired, seen, visited, and changed. Below ground, time behaves differently. A sealed chamber can hold a final moment. A cave wall can preserve a mark for thousands of years. A tomb can keep a name alive after the voice that spoke it disappears. A foundation deposit can remain hidden while generations walk above it without knowing it is there. In this way, the underground becomes a second calendar, one that does not follow seasons or festivals, but burial, sealing, collapse, and rediscovery. It keeps time by stillness. There is a quiet paradox here. Many underground sacred acts were not meant for us. The people who placed offerings in dark chambers were not creating museum displays. Those who sealed a shaft may have wished no one to enter again. Those who painted remote cave walls did not imagine tourists, cameras, laboratories, or careful debates about pigment and dating. Yet their hidden acts survived precisely because they were hidden. The desire to withdraw meaning from ordinary view made that meaning harder for time to destroy. Concealment became preservation. Silence became evidence. This is one reason lost temples beneath the earth feel more intimate than monuments in open air. A public temple declares itself. A buried chamber with a lamp, a seed, a bone, or a print of a foot does something different. It does not shout across history. It waits. It asks the modern observer to slow down, to accept fragments, to resist filling every gap too quickly. The underground teaches patience because it rarely gives itself whole, even when the architecture is impressive. The meaning is partial, even when the chamber is intact. The ritual is gone. What survives in the record suggests devotion, fear, hope, discipline, and memory, but not always the exact words that carried them. That incompleteness is not a failure of the story. It is the story. Ancient mystery is not valuable because it can be turned into a dramatic secret with one final solution. It is valuable because it preserves the distance between lives separated by immense time. The buried temple reminds us that ancient people were neither simple nor unknowable. They were close enough to recognize in their grief, caution, reverence, and desire to endure, yet distant enough that their inner worlds cannot be fully possessed. A painted hand on stone feels immediate. The belief behind it remains just beyond reach. The sacred beneath memory also reveals that civilizations do not disappear all at once. They sink in layers. A temple is abandoned, then reused, then buried. A tomb is robbed, then forgotten, then found. A cave loses its ritual meaning, then becomes a shelter, then a legend, then an archaeological site. A sacred spring is renamed by later faiths but remains visited. Old gods leave no living worshippers, yet the path worn toward their sanctuary remains under the soil. Memory does not simply survive or vanish. It changes states, like water moving through stone. In the end, the lost temples beneath the earth are not only about gods, kings, priests, or rituals. They are about the human refusal to let meaning remain on the surface. People bury what they fear losing. They hide what they believe is powerful. They place the dead below because love and obligation do not end neatly at death. They build secret chambers because some truths feel too dangerous or too sacred for open daylight. They descend because the earth seems to promise contact with origins. The first darkness, the buried seed, the ancestral bone, the hidden water, the place before speech. And when those places return, they return changed. The ancient ritual is over. The community that understood it is gone. The god may have no temple above, no priest, no festival, no name remembered by anyone living nearby. But the underground has kept the outline of the act. It has held the chamber, the soot, the pigment, the sealed stone, the offering, the silence. That is enough to show that beneath every visible civilization lies another world of hidden meaning, made not for display, but for endurance. The temple below the earth is the past at its most vulnerable and its most stubborn. It is broken, buried, incomplete, and still present. The descent now slows. The lamp burns lower, and the walls no longer seem to press so tightly. Behind us are the painted animals of deep caves, the sealed rooms beneath temples, the tomb corridors cut for kings, the springs rising from darkness, the underground refuges, the false legends, the real fragments, and the careful hands of modern excavators brushing dust from things once meant never to be seen again. Each place belongs to its own people, its own landscape, its own lost language of fear and hope, yet together they leave one lingering image: humanity kneeling at the edge of the earth, placing meaning into darkness. Above ground, civilizations are loud for a while. They raise gates, towers, palaces, roads, and walls. They argue, trade, worship, conquer, rebuild, and name themselves permanent. Then weather comes. Rivers move, roofs fall, languages change. The living forget the names of the dead. Fields cover streets, sand covers thresholds, roots enter stone. What once seemed fixed becomes another layer beneath someone else's world. But below, in certain lucky pockets of silence, a little remains, a footprint where the clay dried before it could be disturbed, a stain of smoke where a lamp trembled, a red mark where a hand touched stone, a seed that never sprouted, a broken vessel placed with care, a chamber closed by people who believed that closing mattered. These traces are small, but they carry the weight of attention. They remind us that ancient lives were not only measured by empires and monuments, but by gestures made in hidden rooms. Perhaps that is why these buried temples continue to call to us. They do not give back the past whole. They give back just enough to make the silence feel alive. They show that memory can survive without speech, that reverence can outlast its religion, and that the earth beneath our feet is never merely ground. It is the resting place of vanished worlds, the keeper of unfinished meanings, and the dark archive of everything people once trusted to stone, soil, and time. And somewhere, beyond the last open chamber, there are still sealed places waiting. No footsteps cross them now. No flame moves over their walls. They rest under hills, deserts, cities, forests, and fields, holding their quiet until the surface shifts again. The world above keeps changing, bright and restless, but beneath it, the old darkness remains patient,